Police tried to take a black woman's luxury car, but no one expected what happened 5 minutes later. Before we begin, make sure to stay until the end of the video, because what you will discover will change the way you view assumptions and prejudices in our society. You won't want to miss the reason why this story is so important. Why does owning a luxury car make someone seem suspicious? What assumptions do we carry when we see someone who doesn't fit the mold? What happens when someone is unfairly targeted for driving a luxury car? In this heart-pounding story, a black woman is pulled over by the police simply for owning an expensive vehicle. Tension escalates as the officers attempt to seize her car, but only 5 minutes later, her young millionaire husband arrives on the scene. What happens next will leave you speechless. This story will make you question assumptions, challenge racial profiling, and confront the harsh reality of discrimination. Get ready for an emotional roller coaster that exposes the truth behind this shocking encounter. What happens when preconceived notions crash headfirst into reality? Here begins our story. That is the question running through Officer Daniel's mind as he pulls up behind the black luxury car. A young black woman is sitting behind the wheel, her hair perfectly styled, a calm expression on her face, completely unaware that she is about to become the center of a nightmare she didn't ask for. The car was immaculate, the type of vehicle that turns heads in any neighborhood, a symbol of status, success, and wealth. But in this case, for these officers, it symbolized something completely different. Could she really afford this car? Was it even hers? The unspoken questions lingered as Officer Daniel turned on his lights. He could have easily just driven past, but something inside him made him stop. He didn't recognize the woman, he didn't recognize the car, and in his mind, that was enough reason to question the license and registration. "Ma'am," he said with sharp and biting words. But here's a question. Why does her mere existence behind the wheel of that car feel like a crime in his eyes? The woman's name was Kayla. She had done everything right that day. Her only crime was driving a car too expensive for what the officers assumed someone like her could afford. Kayla handed over her documents, trying to remain calm even though her heart was racing. What could she possibly have done wrong? She wondered. The officer looked at her papers with narrow eyes. Is that suspicion or something else? He asked her a few curt questions about where she was heading. She politely answered, thinking this would be over in a moment. But then the second officer, Officer Mitchell, approached the car, circling it like a predator eyeing prey. What was going on here? Why weren't they letting her go? "Ma'am, step out of the car," demanded Officer Daniel. His voice wasn't just authoritative, it was laced with something darker. Kayla hesitated. Why did she need to step out? She wasn't speeding, she wasn't breaking any laws, but the way they were looking at her was as if they had already decided she was guilty of something. That's when Officer Mitchell added fuel to the fire. "Where'd you get this car? It looks a little too nice for someone like you." The word stung, but Kayla knew better than to react. What happens if she pushes back? Would they arrest her? Would things get worse? She swallowed her pride, got out of the car, and faced them with a steady gaze. "How do you prove your innocence when you're already seen as guilty?" she asked. Why was this happening to her? Was it because she was young, black, and successful? Or was it just a coincidence that they pulled her over in a quiet, predominantly white neighborhood? What do you do when your mere presence is a threat to someone's assumptions? Officer Daniel started inspecting her car, running his hand along the pristine paint job as if searching for any sign that it didn't belong to her. The tension was suffocating. Kayla knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but here she was standing outside her own car, being treated like a suspect. Suddenly, Officer Daniel muttered something into his radio, and that's when it happened. He turned back to Kayla and said words that chilled her to the bone. "We're going to have to tow this vehicle, ma'am. We've got reason to believe it's stolen." Stolen? How could they think that Kayla had all the paperwork, all the proof she needed that the car was hers? But in their eyes, none of that mattered. Why did the sight of her behind the wheel of an expensive car automatically lead to this conclusion? Kayla's voice trembled with frustration as she tried to explain. "This is my car. I have the registration, I have everything. Why are you doing this?" But Officer Daniel wasn't listening. The assumptions had already been made. Why is it that no matter what she says, it feels like the truth is irrelevant? Kayla's heart raced as she pulled out her phone. She needed help. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her husband. He was only 5 minutes away, and she prayed he could fix this before things got worse. But time seemed to stretch out endlessly as the officers continued to talk about towing her car, acting as if she wasn't even there. What would it take for them to see her as more than just a stereotype? The sound of a high-performance engine cut through the tension in the air like a knife. Kayla held her breath as a sleek matte black Lamborghini rolled to a stop a few meters away. Her husband, Daniel, a young millionaire entrepreneur, got out, and everything the officers weren't expecting happened. What happens when their assumptions meet cold, hard reality? Daniel walked over with a confidence that was impossible to ignore. His presence shifted the entire energy of the scene. He approached the officers calmly, but there was an unmistakable edge in his voice. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, locking eyes with Officer Daniel. The officers hesitated. Why did everything about this man suddenly challenge everything they had assumed about Kayla? Would they back down or try to double down on their mistake? Daniel held out his hand. "This is the registration, officer. I'm sure you have no reason to impound my wife's car." Officer Daniel faltered for a moment. What happens when the truth can no longer be ignored? Instead of de-escalating, Officer Mitchell, who had circled the car like a vulture, made one final dangerous move. "We're still not convinced this car belongs to her. People like you can afford to throw money around, but that doesn't mean the car isn't stolen. People like you." The words hung in the air like a slap in the face. Kayla's jaw clenched, and Officer Daniel calmed slightly. Would they let this go, or were they about to push it too far? The next 5 minutes felt like a lifetime. Daniel pulled out his own paperwork, proof of purchase, legal documents, anything they could ask for. The officers had nothing left to question but their pride. Could they walk away without admitting they were wrong? What would it take for these men to finally admit defeat? In the end, the officers had no choice but to leave. They handed back the registration and stepped away from the car. But even as they drove off, the weight of the encounter still hung heavily in the air. Kayla leaned against the car, her hands trembling. Why did something as simple as driving her own car turn into a battle for her dignity? Daniel stood beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulder. The car was just a car, but the scars left behind by this experience were far deeper. Why is it that in 2024 we're still asking these questions? How many more times will people like Kayla have to prove they belong? How long before assumptions change and the world realizes that a person's value has nothing to do with the car they drive? The day had started like any other but ended with Kayla and Daniel in the quiet aftermath of an experience that would stay with them for years to come. But ask yourself this. How would you have felt in their shoes? What would you have done if it happened to you? This story is a reminder of the assumptions we carry and the ways they shape our world. It's a call to question everything, to look beyond the surface, beyond stereotypes, and to see the person standing before us, because one day it could be you. If you've watched this far, comment from which country you're watching us and leave 100 in the comment section, because you're the type of person who likes to finish what they start. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to get notifications whenever we drop new videos. If this video has helped you connect more with yourself and inspired you on your growth journey, take action and subscribe to the Vidasto Inspiration channel to discover more stories that will fill you with motivation and hope. I would love to hear your opinion, so leave a comment telling me how this story has impacted your life or what reflections it has left you with. And if you believe this message can inspire someone you know, share it with your friends so they too can find inspiration and purpose in their lives.